The Australian Outback, an ocean of red dust and silence stretching endlessly toward the horizon. No city lights, no nearby neighbors, only the hum of wind and the low cry of distant birds carried through empty miles. Somewhere out there, a little boy vanished. 4-year-old Gus Lamont, a name now whispered in homes, on search radios, and across headlines that refuse to fade. He was last seen playing near a sandpit on his family's remote property near Una, South Australia, and then, nothing. No footprints leading away, no sound, no trace. But what makes this case even more unsettling isn't just the disappearance, it's the silence that followed. A silence not from the land, but from the man who should have been the loudest voice searching for answers, Gus's father. Since that day, he's barely spoken. No statements, no interviews, no pleas for help, just quiet. And in the world of true crime, silence can be more chilling than any confession. Was it grief? Was it distance? Or was it something else entirely? Something buried deep within the Lamont family itself? Because sometimes the loudest mystery isn't the disappearance, it's the silence that follows it. If you stand for truth and justice, like, share, and subscribe to Shadow Detective. Comment where you're watching from, and tell us, what do you think really happened to little Gus Lamont? Australia's outback is vast, a world defined not by what's there, but by what isn't. Endless plains of ochre earth, fences stretching beyond sight, the kind of isolation where you can scream, and no one would ever hear. The Lamont family lived in this isolation, on a small, weathered property outside Una, a farming district known for its hard soil and harder lives. A place where people depend on routine, resilience, and each other. But for the Lamonts, that sense of togetherness seemed distant. Neighbors described the family as quiet, kept to themselves. The father, reserved, a man of few words. The mother, kind but weary, often seen alone when she came into town. They weren't social outcasts, but they weren't part of the heartbeat of the community either. In places like this, where distance defines survival, families learn to rely on their own hands. But that same distance, both physical and emotional, can also hide things. Loneliness, fractures, secrets. And when something goes wrong, it can take hours, sometimes days, before anyone even realizes it. That's what makes this case so haunting, because by the time anyone knew Gus was missing, he had already vanished into the kind of silence that can swallow sound, time, and truth all at once. A tiny child, gone without a trace, and a family left standing in a silence so deep, it raised more questions than comfort. It was a quiet afternoon, still, dry, and ordinary. The kind of day that doesn't warn you it's about to change everything. According to reports, Gus Lamont was last seen playing outside near the family home, a child at peace with the land, barefoot in the dust, close enough for comfort, far enough to feel free. Then, nothing. No one saw him wander off. No one heard him cry. And when the family finally realized he was gone, the minutes had already turned to hours. The father reportedly began searching nearby, calling his son's name, scanning the low scrub and saltbush. The mother, panicked, contacted neighbors, who joined the desperate search. By the time police and volunteers arrived, the sun was already lowering, bleeding gold across the horizon as the first torches flickered to life. The search that followed became one of the largest in the region's memory. Local farmers, SES units, police, and even helicopters combed the land. But what they didn't find said more than what they did. There were no footprints beyond the yard, no signs of struggle, no discarded toys or torn clothing, nothing to suggest a direction or a clue. It was as if Gus had simply evaporated. Authorities at first leaned toward misadventure. Perhaps the boy had wandered into the bush and succumbed to the elements. But the deeper the search went, the less sense that theory made. Tracking dogs found no scent trail. The terrain, though vast, wasn't endless. It should have offered something. Instead, it offered silence. And in that silence, suspicion began to whisper. Because when a child disappears in plain sight, the first question isn't where he went, it's who was watching. As the hours turned into days, the story of Gus Lamont's disappearance spread far beyond Una. Media crews arrived, search teams expanded, but for investigators, the case was already drifting into uneasy territory, because nothing about the scene felt right. The land around the Lamont property was flat and open. You could see for hundreds of meters in every direction. If a child had wandered off, Someone should have seen him, or at least found something by now. But there was another detail that made investigators pause. The family's response. Neighbors noticed that Gus's father remained distant, even during the most frantic moments of the search. He didn't appear on camera. He gave no emotional appeals, no interviews. Some described him as calm, others as detached. Of course, grief wears many faces, but investigators couldn't ignore the pattern, the subtle inconsistencies in statements, the gaps in the timeline, and above all, the silence. When detectives asked for a detailed account of the day, reports suggest that times didn't always align. One version of events placed Gus outside playing around midday. Another suggested it was later. A few minor details kept shifting, small but enough to raise quiet concern. Still, police never named any suspects. There were no charges, no evidence of a crime, only unanswered questions, and a father whose silence grew louder with each passing day. As public attention grew, so did speculation. Some wondered if it was exhaustion or shock. Others whispered about family strain, emotional distance, or things unsaid. And in that swirl of rumor and restraint, the investigation began to lose its rhythm. Search teams pulled back, cameras left town, and the case, like the boy himself, seemed to fade into the quiet expanse of the Outback. But beneath that silence, a darker question lingered. Was this just tragedy, or something more private? As investigators retraced every movement, every hour of that day, 3 possible explanations began to take shape. Each one carried weight, each one its own kind of heartbreak. The first theory, the accidental wandering. Perhaps Gus, full of curiosity, had simply strayed too far. A child chasing a sound, an animal, or a fleeting moment of wonder. It happens more often than people realize. A few steps, a turn, and suddenly the landscape swallows you whole. But this theory, though simple, left behind a deeper problem. In open terrain, something should have been found. A footprint, a scrap of fabric, a scent trail for the dogs to follow. Yet there was nothing, just silence and space. The second theory, an abduction. Not a random act, but something deliberate. To reach the Lamont property, one must travel over an hour from the nearest highway, across rough, isolated tracks. This was not a place stumbled upon by chance. If someone came here, they came with purpose. But why? And how did they vanish without leaving a trace? No tire marks, no witnesses, only unanswered questions and roads that lead nowhere. And then, the theory no one wanted to say aloud. Neglect or concealment. That maybe something had gone wrong at home. An accident followed by panic. A hesitation to call for help. Hours lost, and with them, a chance to save a life. In this version there is no villain. Only fear. The fear of judgment. The fear of losing everything. And sometimes, fear itself can become a cage. But as speculation grew, the father's silence remained. No denial, no defense, no statement at all. To the public, that quiet began to speak volumes. To investigators, it meant little. Silence isn't guilt, but in the court of public opinion, silence is noise. Still, one question echoed through every conversation, every report, every late-night theory. If this was an accident, why wasn't it reported sooner? And if it wasn't, who was protecting who? To understand what might have happened to Gus Lamont, you have to understand the people left behind. The faces behind the headlines. The voices that fell silent long before the cameras arrived. At the center of it all, a family divided by distance, bound by love, and haunted by questions they can't escape. His mother, Jess, once described Gus as sunshine on 2 legs, a boy who loved the dirt under his fingernails, who laughed when the wind caught his hair, who thought the Outback was one big playground. His grandmother, Josie, raised him as if he were her own son. She was there when he took his first steps. She was there that afternoon, the one who sounded the alarm when he was gone. To this day, people say she still leaves the porch light on at night, in case Gus somehow finds his way home. And then there's Joshua, the father. A man described by some as quiet, even reserved. He lived miles away, worked hard, and kept to himself. But since that day, his silence has grown into a shadow all its own. No public statements, no appeals, no visible emotion, only distance. To some, that restraint looks like control. To others, indifference. But perhaps it's something else entirely. Maybe silence is how some people survive grief. Maybe it's the only way to stay standing when the world demands answers you don't have. Behind the investigations, behind the rumors and analysis, there's a family that has fractured under the weight of time. People trying to live with the unbearable, to sleep in a house where a child once laughed. In the town of Una, people still speak his name in hushed tones. They say the wind feels different out there now, heavier somehow. Because when a child disappears, the silence never leaves. It lingers. It seeps into the soil, into the walls, into the lives of everyone who remembers. And for the Lamonts, that silence has become both a prison and a shield, a reminder of what was lost and what was never found. Nearly a year has passed since Gus Lamont vanished into the red dust of South Australia's outback, and still, not a single trace, no scent, no object, no evidence of what really happened that evening. Only time and silence. The official investigation remains open. Police have stated that all possibilities are still being explored. No arrests, no charges, just a case that refuses to fade, no matter how many days pass. But one question continues to echo louder than the rest. Why has Gus's father remained silent? Some say it's guilt, others fear. A few suggest it's simply grief expressed in the only way he knows how. After all, silence can be a form of protection or punishment, and sometimes it's both. For the mother who still leaves the porch light burning, for the grandmother who can't bring herself to change a thing in his room, time hasn't moved forward. It's stayed locked in that afternoon, 5 p.m., when a boy with sand on his hands and sunlight in his hair simply disappeared. And maybe that's the hardest part to accept, that sometimes the truth isn't buried deep. It's right in front of us, hidden in the pauses between words, the hesitation before a phone call, the silence that says more than any statement ever could. For now, the Outback keeps its secrets. The red dust still swirls across the empty paddocks, and somewhere in that vastness, a question waits, unanswered, unforgotten. If you have any information about the disappearance of Gus Lamont, contact South Australia Police. And if you believe every story deserves closure, every family deserves answers, share this video, comment your theories, and keep Gus's name alive. Because awareness keeps the pressure on, and sometimes, pressure brings the truth to the surface. Until then, we keep listening, we keep asking, we keep remembering, because sometimes, the smallest voices need the loudest echo.